For a look at the national newspapers today, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Lenten, who's a sports economist at La Trobe University. Good morning, Liam. We're going to start with the story that's been dominating for the last few days, and it's the Queensland election result.
Certainly, Karina. Good morning to Michael. And yeah, we've gone with a screenshot from the Courier Mail, naturally. And as often happens, Saturday elections that do take up the Sunday airspace in news time often tend to go on into Monday as well, if there's some kind of angle on which to pin it on. Naturally, when there's a change of government, there's more of an inclination for it to run into Monday, and even more so in this case because the degree of the swing was so emphatic and so profound, and so it's proven to be the case here. So this screenshot has Campbell Newman getting down to work, as it were. But it wasn't the only state-based paper across the country that's running with this morning. Also, it was in the Melbourne Age, as well as the Oz, naturally focusing on the implications for federal Labor, and also the Hobart Mercury. Although never underestimate the Mercury to turn what was ostensibly a Queensland story into a Tasmania one, focusing on how Lara Getting is now the only female Premier in the whole country, and how she plans to stay the course, as it were.
And also, not surprisingly, given the anti-Labor mood there seems to be nationwide, she has no plans to go to an early election.
Naturally, yes.
She values her political survival tremendously.
As will Gillard.
Yeah, what's the whole thing? And you pointed to the Australian. There are lots of the theme of a lot of these stories in the Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. A lot of the papers around the country are just what this means for Julie Gillard, and most commentators agree it's nothing but bad news for federal Labor. Yeah,
and that's despite the fact that it is still a reasonable while in political terms until the next federal election, and there is still ample opportunity for the Parliamentary Labor Party to turn things around, but they really are focusing on the implications for federal Labor in this one.
But it's incredible because just in the last few days leading up to the election, even though this result had been widely predicted, everyone was talking about the momentum that Julia Gillard and her government had managed to gain by having the mining tax pass through the Senate. The carbon tax had passed the year earlier, and that now all this legislation was coming through, and that finally they were managing to hopefully get some clear air and continue the momentum.
Until 8 p.m. on Saturday night.
8 p.m? I thought it was about 1 past 6.
1 past 6, yeah. We're calling
Queensland time.
Well, my take on that is that it's more demonstrable of how a lot of the result can be pinned onto the state-based issues rather than the flow over into federal issues. But then again, from federal Labor's point of view, if there's any lessons to be learnt in it, they'll obviously do their polling and their analysis, and they'll take heed. Let's look now at the Adelaide Advertiser. In fact, a lot of the New Zealand tabloids have this story concerning the 100th commemorations of the Gallipoli landings. Certainly, Michael. We've got the Adelaide Advertiser here, but it also ran front of the Melbourne Herald Sun as well. And I picked this one mainly because this is a story that could be given quite an extensive run intermittently over the next 3 years, because it's with one eye open to the centenary of ANZAC Day in April 2015. Like I said, a tick over 3 years away. And some of the outlets have run with the cost of this report that used a lot of focus groups to the tune of $370,000. And the report seems to be telling us or reminding us about the double-edged sword nature of a very hyped up celebrations for ANZAC Day, and focusing on the multicultural aspect, but also the younger citizens of the country. So anyway, it's one that's sure to get the blood boiling in many sections of the community.
Today, yeah, it essentially says that it's a federal department, Federal Veterans Affairs Department funded survey that says the 100th anniversary celebrations or commemorations would risk divisions in the community, and also would put young people off, because surveys do show that young people in Australia do oppose war of any kind. A fairly brave call, given the Veterans Affairs community is still very strong, and there's nothing more held more highly in their hearts than what happened on the first ANZAC Day.
Yes, it seems a bit odd in the context that certainly in the last generation there seems to be more reports in the day after ANZAC Day about the annual commemorations, that younger people tend to be getting more into it with the passage of time.
And as well as that, the numbers of young people that actually take the pilgrimage to Gallipoli while they're travelling through Europe and spending a gap year in the UK or doing a couple of years on a working holiday. I mean, the numbers are extraordinary, and the numbers, and then if you look even younger than that, school-age children going to the dawn services on Anzac Day, it's incredible to think that on the flip side of that, you'd have people saying that people would actually be unhappy about big celebrations for the 100th
And
celebration.
the other scandal is that this report, or these series of reports, cost nearly $400,000 at a time of budgetary stress and will we make the surplus or not? It's stuff like that that is also going to generate lots of anger.
Yeah. Yes, I said they made reference to the cost. But one other thing that's in the detail there, Michael, is that it also recommends that there is no reference to current military action, which is something that people will also focus on.
Now let's move on to the Australian and the GWS AFL debut on Saturday night. The only team, they had the Sydney Derby to kick off the season.
Yeah, and Karina, this is one that I chose just because of its links to my own research area. And now, a day after the actual event and the initial news run focusing on the result and how supposedly Western Sydney did a reasonably good job in containing the Swans, attention's now focusing more on the demand aspect. Reports about how good the event was for the people who went there, the crowd itself, television ratings and so on. And the byline to the headline in this story was AFL claims propaganda victory. With that figure of 38,000, I would regard that as the bare minimum acceptable for them to kind of claim victory in the competitive stakes with the other codes in the country. That figure is just marginally above the average for an AFL match over the last few years. Right. But the real proof in the pudding in the next few years will be in terms of television ratings, because of course that was the basis on which the AFL decided to expand to Western Sydney rather than Tasmania or other markets.
Liam Lenten, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks once again.
Thank you. Let's get the rest of the sport headlines. We're joined again by Paul Kennedy. And let's start with the cycling.
Yes, let's do that. There's sport headlines. Cadel Evans has claimed his first win of the season, taking out the three-day